Oh my gosh, I barely had time to even eat lunch before transitioning from the patron only show to this live show of the Nature Journal show. No time for lunch now. So, today we are going to be doing some drawing practice. So, I might as well switch to the document camera and we are going to do a warm up and get our drawing muscles and eye hand coordination ready to go. So, what we're going to do to start off with are some warm ups that you might or might not want to do in your regular nature journal. So, if you're precious about your nature journal pages, you might want to just take a extra piece of paper, maybe even just some cheap copy paper, and use that for these warm ups. One thing you can do, oh, is my no sound on? Alexandra, let me know what's going on for you there. Hopefully my sound is working properly. Anyways, so what you can do is you can just take a piece of paper like this and do your warm-ups there. One other trick is to tape this paper in your nature journal, and for some people that helps them do their warm-up sketches without worrying too much about how it looks. So the warm-up sketches that I'm going to do, I think I actually first learned this from John Muir Laws, and I think he talks about it in his book, the really thick one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to practice using different types of mark making using different parts of our body. So first, what we're going to do. Okay, I understand now, Alexandra. Well, glad you can make it. Welcome, Alexandra, Ivea, Nature Sketches are all here, and there's more people watching that aren't participating in the live. If you go over on the side on YouTube, you should be able to find a place where you can post comments and ask questions. So the first thing we're going to do is a warm-up, a couple warm-ups actually. And a lot of people don't think about warm-ups for nature journaling or drawing, even though they think about warm-ups for all of these other. Something is wrong with my microphone, keeps sort of like unplugging itself. So I'm going to just have to switch my microphone here, unfortunately, because I can't be paying attention to that all the time. That's really annoying because this is my better microphone. So hopefully the sound is not that bad, but I'm just going to have to switch microphones because this one keeps turning itself off for some reason. And that's my good microphone, unfortunately. Okay, technical difficulties. So what we're going to do is we're going to do pencil lines, finger lines, wrist lines, and elbow lines. I don't think we'll be able to fit shoulder lines into our warm-up. Yay, Jose is here, and Jean is here too. So get your drawing tool ready, and you can do this warm-up with a variety of drawing tools. I'm going to do it on a separate paper. That way I can be really wild about it. So the first thing is to make lines, usually lines or curves, using just moving your fingers, not moving. Notice how maybe hold your hand here to make sure you're not moving this. And this is probably how you draw all the time. So practice doing, going both ways. You might have to move your location, which is an interesting thing to notice, that to get over here, I have to move, unless I'm moving my wrist, I have to move my whole hand around. So get some of these, do whatever kinds you want, but just moving your fingers, just moving your drawing tool with your fingers. What kinds of marks can you make with just moving your fingers? And your fingers are good for certain types of drawing. So now, sí, José, igualmente, lástima que no podemos compartir mate también. And now what we're going to do is we're going to switch to our wrists. So what you'll notice, if you remember geometry at all, is that you suddenly have, the fulcrum is in a different place, or maybe it's not the fulcrum, but you're rotating from a different place and you have a bigger radius now than you did with just your fingers. So this is why If you need to make a long, smooth curve, maybe the back of an animal, or maybe a wave, or maybe a snake, if you need to make a really long curve like this and you're just using your fingers, you're going to have to keep moving your hand like this, and you're going to end up with, if you've ever ended up with a line like that, it's not quite as compelling as these other ones. This is super important, and is a good thing to know about and to be able to practice. So we did our finger lines, wrist, and you can try going the other way too. You can try starting here and going out that way. What does it take if you want to go, if you want to make a line going the other way? What kind of movement does it take? And can you do that just with your wrist? Maybe you can't. Well, that's a good thing to know, because that means that if you have to draw a line like that, you might have to move from your elbow, which is the next one. See, it's so crazy to think that for all the drawing that many of us have done, how many times have you warmed up before you started drawing? Whereas with other things, like with sports or maybe even with music, how often when you do those things do you do some kind of warm up or tuning? Why is that so uncommon in a lot of forms of visual art? Okay, so now I probably don't have enough room for doing from my elbow, and you might not even be able to see it on the camera here. But now what I want to do is I want to keep this stationary. I want to keep my fingers stationary, and I want to just rotate at my wrist. And this is going to make much bigger lines. I probably can't even zoom out far enough. Ideally, I would probably be doing this on a bigger sheet of paper even. But your elbow lines are probably going to look something like this. And you might even be able to get really straight line. You might even be able to get really, really straight, consistent, straight lines, and really nice long curves here. Because remember, once again, your body is basically like a compass, and you're changing the length of that rotating body from this length of your fingers to this length, and then now it's almost it's not a meter long, but it's getting there, and that has a big influence. And a lot of times when we're nature journaling or drawing, if we're not doing these warm-ups and we're not thinking about it, I bet you that a lot of the time you spend in this finger area, and that might not always be the best place for what you're trying to do. So at the very least, doing this practice before you jump into drawing, that took us 3 minutes. That could be a really great practice for you to get started. Now I'm going to show you my other favorite ones, and these are not things that I invented. These are things that people have been doing for thousands of years in many cases. So next I'm going to write practice here so I know what's going on. And it is the 20th to 2022. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a value range. And a good thing about this is to try doing it with different drawing tools or different techniques. So we're going to do one that's discrete, and then we're going to do one that's more of like a gradient. But this is something, if you really want to be a buff artist, these are the push-ups that you want to be doing. And I'm telling you, this makes such a big difference. You can make these different sizes, but let's aim for easy at first, and maybe we'll go with 6. So we're going to make this sort of long rectangular shape here. And you don't have to draw it yet if you don't want to, or you can just, fill up your page with attempts and things like that. That's what I often end up doing. But basically, to give you a preview, we're going to turn this into a sort of thing like that, and it's going to be a value range going from darkest to lightest. So one will be the darkest and another one will be the lightest. So I'm going to start with this sort of size here. Don't make it too big, or else you'll spend all day. See how big this is compared to my finger? Maybe make one that's just as wide as your finger, or else it could take all day. Divide it in the middle like that. then divide each one of these into, now that's 4, and then let's go ahead and divide those into 8. So it's not going to be super easy, but it's not going to be impossible. And what we're going to try to do is make each one of these get a little bit lighter. And the darkest I'm just going to put on this side, and I'll go ahead with this ink tool that I'm using right now. That, let me delete that person's comment. The thing that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to make this one completely black. And so if you're using pencil, make it as dark as you can with pencil. Whatever mark making tool you're using, make this one the darkest possible. And then we're going to write the numbers. Maybe I should have done that first. I'm going to call the lightest 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I guess that makes it us have 7. This one you leave it complete. You can leave completely white. And so now I think we'll probably want to start over here with 1 and work our way that way. So what I'm going to do is, since I am not using a pencil, I can't really create a lighter versions of black. So what I have to do is trick your eye into thinking your eye is seeing different types of gray through optical blending. So for example, a lot of stuff that we see in real life that we think is a certain color, it's actually a bunch of dots like that with other colors mixed in. And when your eye sees that, it blends those into gray. So this would equal, this goes through your eye and your eye sees gray. Instead of, oh, it's black and white, black and white, black and white. And actually, with some things that look like this, if you zoom in on them enough with like a magnifying glass or under a microscope, you'll realize they actually look like this, and it's not solid black. The solid black is just the illusion that your brain creates. So I'm going to start over here with 1. You can too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use lines. Instead of dots, I'm going to use lines. So how can I, what is the lightest thing that I can do with lines? If you're using pencil, that would look like, you know, maybe it'll look like this. It'll probably barely even show up on the camera. Pencil, your lightest pencil marks might look like that. And with pencils, you actually can create grays that look like they're more of a just solid tone like that. And you can do things such as smudging. With ink, you can't really do that the same way. All right, so now once you have 1, go to 2, and remember, we're trying to get it all the way evenly up to 7. We might have to come back a couple times. With ink, you have less ability to build up on it and build it down slowly. Whereas with this, I could go back and erase even more white. So this is basically, this feels really repetitive, and people are like, this is not creative, da-da-da. If you want to be a really good creative artist, doing this kind of practice, it's like doing push-ups or practicing the scales at music. If you have the discipline to do this practice, you will be able to unleash so much more of your vision and your actual potential when you're doing the art. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times we don't realize that when we get into creative arts in modern times, partly because of how they're taught, partly because of how people think about things such as talent. A lot of people want to skip over the push-ups and the training and the practice and just kind of start making their creative stuff with no rules, no judgment, things like that. And I've definitely gone through that stage myself, and I didn't realize what I was missing out on, basically, and that I thought I was doing something that I wanted, but I was just kind of shortchanging myself. So that's not the best version, but I mean, it's not super clean hatching, but anyways, I think it builds up sort of evenly. Maybe it skips a lot to get to this one. Now I have to remember I have 3 more here to go. Maybe I made these way too big. Maybe you did too. Maybe you made your boxes too big, which means it'll take more work. Hopefully this pen doesn't sound really annoying on the microphone, especially now that I'm using a different microphone. Let me know in the comments how the sound quality is. I might not be able to take this microphone with me when I moved to Ecuador anyways. So my fancy microphone stopped working before I had the chance to leave it behind. Okay, so that's a little bit darker than 3. Wow, this is gonna get challenging here because now I have to squeeze in the rest. Hopefully yours, if you feel like it was really easy, do another value square, or a value strip, and try again with a different drawing tool or a different technique. So if you're using graphite, you're going to have to do that sort of smudging technique, and you might even use an eraser to lighten it up if you make it too dark. Or you can just start another strip. If your first strip didn't come out great, just do another one. Don't get too precious about it because this is a practice, remember. Okay, so I could just keep going with this same pin, but I think what I might actually try to do on this side is this pin. One of the things I really like about it is that it has a pointy, sharp side and then a fat side. So depending on how you put it down, you can get really thick or really thin lines. I've been using the thin. Maybe I should just keep going with the thin. That would be the actual really proper thing to do. I'm trying to set a good example about being disciplined here, so I should. Part of me was thinking of switching to the fat side and just coloring it in super, super quickly, like twice or 3 times as fast with that side. But I still need to kind of make it slightly lighter than the solid black, the number 7. And you can come up with the numbers you want. Maybe you only want 6, maybe you want 8, maybe you want 10. And if you in your mind, you can keep one of these value scales in your mind and know your tool. Which tool are you using and what is this that you are capable of doing? And you should know that this is in your pocket, in your sheath, where you keep your sword, where you keep your nature journaling supplies, and you can whip this out at any moment, and look at something in real life and be like, that's a 6, that's a 2, that the back of that bird is a 3. And just by having this inside of your brain, that is going to make you so much more of a powerful artist, and you will be able to capture the things that you see in nature or whatever you want to draw, so much more easily if you can have this in your brain and just know, like, okay, when you look at something, is that a 3? Is that a 4? And just starting to think about these numbers when you look at things that are light and dark is going to help you a lot. So you could practice this a million times. You could practice it with different tools. The other ways to do this with ink, I could have done cross hatching, where I have lines going both ways. Like if you look up close at money or old printed stuff like this, if you look really closely, I don't know if this camera can handle it. If you look really closely, there are a bunch of fine lines. Look at that. That is crazy. So there is no gray. There is no gray in this drawing. All there is lines of pure black next to pure white. And so you have to practice that before you can get that good. If you look up close at money, you will be amazed at how all of these little lines make the lights and the darks. So you can do that. You can do it with curves. Like if you look on this, I think it has curves. Money, it definitely uses, because that's like engraving. They're scratching those lines into metal. And I think those use curved hatching. And then you can also do dots. So some art is made up of dots, and I'm going to show you a couple examples. The other thing that you can do to improve your drawing and through drawing practice is copying other artists. Copy other artists? Some people think that's crazy or terrible, or they say that they never copy anybody, never learn from anybody. But I'm going to show you something right now. Oh, hopefully you didn't get a sneak preview. But look at this right here. This is ink. So basically you have either, there's basically only 2 colors that you can make. You can make that dark, or you can make the light, where the light comes through. And look at the different ways that this person made those marks. You can see dots there, and you can see lines there. The lines aren't always going with the curve of the object, but like look up here on these clouds, the lines are going with the curve of the object. Sometimes the lines go back and forth over each other to be darker. Sometimes they're sort of outlining things, and sometimes they're dots, sometimes they're sort of swirling. Those are all things you can learn when you look at something like this and think about it, like, what is that person doing? Or look at this, what is that person doing? And spend some time you know, looking at that and trying to draw it. So this right here is Vincent van Gogh. Actually, a lot of people don't know about his ink drawings. He has a bunch of ink drawings, and it can be interesting to look at mark making in his ink drawings. Here's another example. Look at all of these different sort of dots and line techniques. So looking at something like this, and you could just try copying that and seeing, you know, like, huh, this really works for me, or this doesn't work for me. And all of this mark making, this would be totally legit in nature journaling when you're out in the field. What are ways that you can make this value range? Basically, that's what matters, is getting a value range. And understanding this concept is more important than color. And if you can control this in your drawings, in your landscapes, in your paintings, everything is going to be so much better. Okay, cool. So the next thing the last one we're gonna do is the last warm up we're gonna do is line variation. And but first let me write up here value. Actually, I want to use something crazier to write that. Value. Value is the technical artistic term for the difference between light and dark. And this is a value range. This drawing has a wide value range. There's other drawings, like this drawing doesn't have a good value range. A ver, era el famosísimo Van Gogh, y en este libro solo son los árboles de él. Pero si haces una búsqueda en Google y puedes buscar dibujos de Van Gogh con tinta, y allá puedes encontrar los dibujos en vez de solo las pinturas. So value range is noticeable here, not noticeable there. So just kind of thinking in terms of value, it's going to make all of your art so much better. It's really, I could go on a huge tangent about value. I think John Muir Laws has a whole video about it as well, but we're not going to go into that because what we're doing today is just different types of practice. So the next one we're going to do is called line variation. This is also one of those art history, you know, or art study words, line variation. So we talked about value, and now we're talking about line variation. So this doesn't have very much line variation. I guess it has some. My old drawings were really bad with line variation, and I'm still trying to get better at it. But basically, what we're going to practice now is making marks and seeing how much different variation we can get in one mark. So a lot of times what we learn when we're writing and stuff is how to minimize the variation. But right now we want to increase it. So for example, if I can start off sort of like how thick can I get, and then how thin can I get that line to do. So right now, practice seeing, and you can try different tools. How thick to how thin can you make in the same drawing? So like that, that's pretty good variation. So that's with, and then if you want to be really technical, like if you could make a whole study of this, and then you could write, you know, this is Fude de Monin. That's the pen that I'm using. I could write the name of this pen underneath. Fude de Monin. I could write the ink. And the paper will even maybe matter. Okay, so then now I'm going to go and I'm going to do this one. I can't believe I need to replace these. Look, it's like almost empty of ink. Oh, tienes todo un hashtag sobre Vincent van Gogh. Qué bueno. Okay, so this is the Fudayaku brush pen. So I could do these next to that and kind of see what they're like. Maybe make, ooh, and it's drying out. So this isn't a good example of line variation because the pen is running out of ink. Fudayaku brush pen. Dry. So you can do it in a variety of ways. You could do this as sort of like a test, or you could just do this as a warm up before you start drawing. Before you start a nature journaling or drawing session, like sometimes when I would teach, I would have people do this. You can start with this, and you can do this before you actually start your drawing for the day. And I guarantee you, it will make you use your tool to closer to its full potential than if you just start off cold. It'll have you thinking. It'll have you thinking about value. It'll have you thinking about the finger, wrist, and elbow lines. Those variation in lines, and it'll have you thinking about line variation and light to dark. And if you're thinking or just like warmed up on those concepts, then you will be ready to go. So I did Fude Demonin twice, but and then another tool. So fountain pens can have a lot of variation. Some tools have more variation than others. So for example, this is probably an example of a really bad one, or like a micron. A micron, you cannot get very much line variation. That's the whole point of the micron. And a lot of our modern writing and drawing tools, the whole point is not to have line variation. Whereas all of these like old, more primitive tools are going to have a huge amount of variation. So that's something to be aware of. If you're a very precise artist or a perfectionist, whoa, I just had a huge ink spill over here on the side outside of the camera. If you're a perfectionist, you might want to try some tools that have more line variation. Let me do a little sketch note here. Some tools better. For variation. And then I'll just draw a brush. This might be why you don't like drawing with an ink brush. But that could be good for perfectionists. At least good practice. So this is where the drawing practice gets really hard. Um, it's hard enough doing push-ups, but now what you need to do is you need to be self-aware enough to realize what kind of practice is going to be the best for you. So I think that a lot of times in art, we end up doing what comes easiest for us, and that's not usually the best thing to make you better at something or help you learn. So for me, for example, when I was a kid, I wanted the sharpest, pointiest, finest, lightest, most precise mechanical pencil possible. And this was probably the biggest size pen I use is a half, what is this? 0.45 millimeters of a line. I probably usually was using like 0.045 millimeters of a line because I wanted those really sharp things. And what I realized now in retrospect is that's probably because I was a perfectionist and it was not helping me learn trying to draw that way. And I would have like a sketchbook, and this is all you would see on the sketchbook is you'd see like, and then I would be like, no, don't like it. And I would turn to the next page. And even my finished drawings, like my really good drawings, would sometimes only be like that big. So I was so focused on little things. And I think that was coming from a place of fear, a place of perfectionism, and not beneficial things, and definitely weren't helping me learn and grow as an artist. So if that is you, if you are self identifying as the person that does that kind of thing, you might want to try some of these other tools that are going to have less control, such as brush pens like this, especially if they're the ones that actually have, bristles on them, sort of like this. Like you could dip this and paint with that, but this is a lot more convenient. I'll post links to all of these later. or you can find them. I've reviewed most of these things on my YouTube channel. If you look in my supplies playlist, and then fountain pens. I'm loving fountain pens right now. They have a certain amount of unpredictability and line variation that I think is really helping me learn. So we did our warm up lines, we did value, we did line variation, and those are really, really essential. But we're gonna jump into practice, some other practice. That's all basically warm up. And without me talking, I would probably do this like as a pretty quick warm up, maybe only spend 5 or 15 minutes on this before like a nature journaling session. But next, we're going to jump into some other stuff. Oh, and I need to remember. Oh, yeah, I got that on my list. Okay. So let's do this. We are going to put some things up here that we can draw together. So I had to go out and raid the local pet cemetery to get some new stuff to show all of you, because I think people have been seeing the same skulls and bones like way too many times. So it's maybe gotten boring for some people. So I had to go dig up some new specimens. We're going to do something tricky with the light too, but I'll talk about that in a second. Oh, I need to drink some tea. I've been straight back to back this morning. I haven't barely had a chance. I had to eat my lunch in like 10 minutes. Okay. This is my lovely teacup. My friend brought it back from Mauritius for me. It has a dodo on it because that's where dodos were from, was Mauritius. It's a small island in the Indian Ocean. Okay, so we are going to do a couple more practice things here that I'm really excited about. And the first one I'm going to talk about is simplifying to basic shapes. So you might see something like this and your brain starts going in all these places and you basically just start drawing an outline. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. That's basically the strategy that I did here. Is I just drew an outline of a skull and didn't really pay attention to the shapes that much. But this is how you can get a lot better. And the way you can do that, or here's another example. Look at this rock. This has actually been napped by a person, so it's flint that someone was trying to make a tool out of. It's not an ancient artifact. This is something that someone did recently, and I saved. But you can see, that you might just start drawing some of these lines. You can see these different lines crossing across the middle, some of these edges. You might just start drawing that in outline, drawing some of the details that you see. But, and you might do the same thing with this skull, but the strategy that can make you better at drawing is by simplifying things to basic shapes, or at least being able to see the basic shapes in other more complicated shapes in nature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the light more extreme, because that helps a lot. And let's just draw this this pyramid right here. This is one of the Platonic solids. It says 1, 2, 3, 4. Tetrahedron, I think it's called. So let's draw this tetrahedron and try to think about it in terms of these values. So look at it right now and try to think, look at your own value scale. Which sides of it match which of these numbers? Is there a 0? Is there a 1? Is there a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5? Probably no 7s in this. At least I don't see any. So look at your value range and just sort of think about which they are, and maybe come up with one for this even, because this is a different value as well. So let's right now just do a little sketch where we do a sort of diagram of this. If you want and are kind of going in more the ADD direction, this is what I do a lot, is I'll just do like 5 versions while the person is talking about the class. Or you could just do one more sort of slow version and make it like a diagram. So the weird thing for me is I have to look at it on the screen so that mine comes out similar to yours. So let's do this. First, one really helpful thing, can put a bounding box around it. Sometimes that helps you keep it small and manageable. And then I'm going to make this a diagram, so I want to leave some space for writing. And I'm just going to focus on, this is weird how I have to look at the camera, but this might not come out super accurate, but um, it's practice. So, and hopefully those will still connect there. Okay, I'm going to be fine with that. And then I'm going to do the shadow as if it were solid, even though it's not. Um, and now I'm going to just use words to identify the values. So um, maybe this is a 0. That's my 0. Shoot, I wish I could see my whole. If I do this, you won't be able to see. Okay, it's a 0, and I'm just going to guess. 0, this is basically a 0 also. This is a 3, and this is a 4. So one thing you could do is just write it out like that with where the numbers are for the values, and that's one approach. And then now I'm going to go ahead and try to draw it in the way that I see it, and try to get the values as accurate as possible. So one thing you might run up against pretty soon is, which way should I make the lines going? And that is where hatching comes in, and it can be a topic that takes you forever, but we're going to try doing that a couple different ways. So this would basically be a value study, and now we're going to practice sort of hatching it. And I think I'm going to change. It was really hard for me to do this one looking at the camera view, so I'm actually going to change the perspective and draw it from the way I see it, the way that I'm standing. Or actually, maybe I'll just move the whole thing so that everybody has to do a new one. Anyways, you can play with something like this a lot and try it in different ways, and just practice it. There's a reason why, artists back in the day used to do stuff like this. It's not just in the movies. I'm finding the angles, actually getting the angles accurate is actually a bigger challenge for me right now. Okay, so I got that. Now I'm going to try using hatching going this way. If you're using graphite, this could be a lot easier potentially. I know I find that graphite for me is sort of more intuitive with this kind of stuff. But that's part of the reason why I'm trying to do it more with ink. So this one, now that I'm reflecting on it, this doesn't really look that much darker. So I'm going to go back and add more lines, and maybe I'll cross them this time. So cross hatching here. So drawing from life is always about looking back and forth at your object and checking the reality. And this is why you can learn so much more drawing from life than drawing from your imagination, is because there's a feedback loop between you and reality. And when you're just drawing from your imagination, there isn't. So you're not really learning that fast. But like, I just learned a bunch of different things, and I'm sure my brain is still struggling on like what's going on here. How much more can I like adapt this or adjust it? So keep looking back at your drawing and being like, wait, that's not quite as dark as that spot. Maybe I'll make it darker. That's that feedback loop, and that's why you'll keep learning more from nature. So what we're going to do now is, without worrying too much about how well we did with this simple shape, we're going to go to a more complex shape, and then we're going to go to some even more complex shapes after that. But let's start with this one, which I think was 2 duodecagons stuck together, except they're missing 2 sides. So the light hits this in a really cool way. Now, without letting your inner perfectionist turn on, let's try to draw this basic shape, focusing on the light and the dark. Yes, Eve, a good point. The shadow faded at the tip, and that was something that I thought I would be able to do with ink, but I didn't. One way you could do that is maybe using a wash there, or not. I did an outline around my shadow, which is probably a bad idea. If you used water-soluble ink like this, or if you're using graphite, you would be able to capture that way more. And I probably should have done a graphite version for anyone who's working at home in graphite. Everything I've been doing so far has been almost entirely in ink, so sorry about that. Um, but for me, ink is what I need to practice more. So that's what we're doing for right now. Okay, so now let's do a quick sketch of this, but let's try to do this in a way where we're starting to adjust it a little bit more from being so technical to more like what we would do in the field. Because pretty soon we're going to be looking at this, and we're going to be looking at this, and this probably has like um, 20 times more surfaces and planes than this does. So the technical vocab word for this part of the lesson, we've talked about some of these major ones before, such as line variation and value. The technical one here is planes. So these aren't the ones that you fly in. These are the ones that they're flat surfaces. So each one of these is a plane. Each one of these is a different plane. So let's sketch this, and I'm going to try to keep it right in that spot and try to think about it as if this were like a rock that you found in nature, or it was an animal, or maybe it was like two salamander eggs stuck together. Don't worry too much about getting it perfect. Let's focus on just trying to get an approximation of them and how they're sort of angling in relationship to each other. The good thing about the more complex shapes in nature that, or this is a shape in nature too, I shouldn't say that, but the good thing about the sort of more complex and less precise shapes in nature is that because they're less mathematically precise than this shape, it's easier for you to fake them. Whereas if you make a mistake with this, even if you don't know that this is duodecagon or whatever, you know something's not right when these shapes don't totally line up perfectly. So because it's a repeating pattern, the brain recognizes that. But for something like this, if you fudge some of the angles a little bit, it won't show up. But nevertheless, it's good to know about some basic shapes and be able to see those and be able to draw those, especially three-dimensionally. Other shapes that are essential, sometimes I just practice over and over again cylinders like this, and putting them into different perspectives. Sometimes I'll just do ellipses, making them flatter and flatter. That is a really good practice, and those are all of these useful shapes, cubes, obviously. And trying to see these when you're looking at things in nature is going to help you draw them. If you want to look at someone who does this, you can look at some of Mark Simmons' drawings. He's been talking about this a lot lately. It really helps. Really, really helps. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of shading on this one, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing. So I'm actually looking at a different angle from all of you, so that's why mine looks different. And this one, interestingly enough, is darker. I guess this one's darker too, but very lightly so. With the ink, it can be hard sometimes to capture the really pale values that aren't quite white. So our tendency is to lie and just say, oh, I guess it's pretty white. That's a white plane. I'll just leave it completely white. And instead, what we should try to do is get at least a little bit of that value on there. And then there's a shadow underneath. Maybe I'll just make that exaggeratedly dark. It's probably not quite correct. And then this shadow going here. And that shadow fades too. The edges of certain shadows frequently fade. So having a strategy for that. Let's see if I can do a little there. So I just rubbed it a little bit with my finger, which is a technique you can do with ink, but very unpredictable, and you end up with black spots on all of your fingers by the end of the day. And then you pick your nose, and it goes downhill from there. All right, so we practice these basic shapes. Now what we're gonna do, and one of the things I should say about this, if you want to practice this at home, one thing that you can do here. Let me just show you one of my journals where that I've been doing lately, like just like in my bullet journal or whatever. But look at how I've been practicing hatching. I'll just draw some of these shapes for like 10 minutes and just practice hatching on those shapes to get my values. Here I did it the other day as well. So one thing you can do is just sort of like doodling, instead of watching TV or whatever. You could just practice some of these hatching marks on different shapes, and this you can do from your imagination even if you don't have any in real life. It's usually easier to do it from your imagination, and just practice doing these. And I know people are probably like, oh my gosh, that is the most boring drawing exercise ever. Well, this is like doing your musical scales. And I swear, if you practice drawing something like this, or even like this with the different shadows over and over again with like a light pointed at it, you're going to become such a better artist, even when it comes to drawing other things. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go to this, and let me see if I can get the light on it in a sort of more dramatic way. I think that's pretty good. So this is, and we're going to zoom in. So you're not going to be able to see my drawing during this one. So just focus on your own drawing, because I'm going to try to get it so it looks as good for you as possible. And that means zooming in on it and not being able to see my sketchbook. But what I want you to focus on is all the things we've just been doing. If you notice yourself getting too perfectionist about it, because we're not going to have an hour to draw this. If you notice yourself getting really perfectionist about it, just do quick multiple sketches instead of like one final one. But the main thing is to be practicing what we've been warming up on, and trying to see the sort of any kind of basic shapes that you can see in here, and focusing on these planes, hatching the planes. So go ahead and get set up. We are going to spend about, I'd say about at least 5 minutes in this current position. And then we'll have some weirder ones after. Remember, if you start off with a really big outline of this thing, that's going to leave a lot more work. Starting with a smaller, or doing multiple smaller sketches could be a good strategy. And I'm noticing that I am starting off with a big outline, and that's often our tendency, but sometimes it's better to draw things from the inside out, and I'm going to be talking about that more in a minute. One of my Patreon patrons, Amber, specifically asked for me to talk about that or show how to do it. And there is a really great Leonardo da Vinci quote somewhere about how there's no lines around things in nature. Things in nature don't have lines, around the outside of them. That is true. But then we end up drawing lines around the outside of everything that we see in nature for some reason. Okay, that didn't come out the way it looks in real life, but I'm going to just keep going. What technique will you use to draw the shadow? Is it a different technique than you use for the planes on the surface of the stone? Do you want to just zoom in on one really micro area and just focus on that? That can be a good strategy. Are you noticing are you noticing any repeated patterns? There are things you could use words for too. I think all the nature journaling techniques can be useful when you're doing something like that. Um, sí, no se ve el dibujo, José, porque estoy intentando enfocar más que todo en la piedra para que la gente pueda dibujar su propio dibujo y tenerlo como más enfocado. Pero ahorita voy a mostrar el mío. Vamos a tener como por lo menos como 3 o 4 minutos para dibujar esta piedra. So I'm noticing that I'm sort of maxing out on my one single drawing, and I'm going to start another one where I just focus on one area or one of the shapes that I didn't get quite right. So if you notice yourself mess up one part of the drawing on your bigger drawing, that's a good time to stop and then try redrawing separately in a separate area that same part multiple times. And that's how I call that like the hyena technique. And that's how you can really get better is you notice like, oh, that was really hard for me to draw. Instead of avoiding it and then doing something totally different that feels easy, take the thing that felt really hard to draw and draw it like 10 times, just over and over and over again. Like they can be quick drawings, but attack that thing and chew on it for a while. And that's like a really good learning strategy, in my opinion. So if you notice yourself running into a part of this rock that is harder for you to draw, or some proportion didn't come out right, just take that and then focus completely on that part for a little bit. And you can separate it out and kind of attack that problem from multiple directions also. So for example, I'll put my drawing up here for a minute to demonstrate this. But for example, if I, oops, I don't want to mess up the rock for people who are drawing the rock. So if, for example, there's like something here that didn't work out for me, I could come down here and try that from multiple different perspectives, maybe draw boxes around it. And on one of them, I could try darkening it using pointillism, like that, stippling. And then on the other one, I could try using curved hatch marks. So instead of just getting frustrated, oh, the other thing I can do is I can draw a little face like this and vent my anger here and write a question like, why hard? Or I'm struggling drawing this right now, or I need to practice drawing this more. Anything like that you could write down there and then come down here and do it a bunch of times and see, can you make it better by tackling it multiple times instead of avoiding it. Hopefully that made sense. And let's start wrapping up this drawing of this one. Maybe you had multiple drawings, and I will show you mine in a second. Entonces vamos a terminar con esta piedra y voy a mostrar el dibujo mío, mi intento. So I didn't really get into the values that much, maybe because I was talking too much. But there is, wait, which pen was I using? There is my version of it. And then here you can see I did like a zoomed in version of the tip. So another thing you could do is you could say, forget the values. I'm just going to, do another one where I just focus kind of on getting the outline and do that kind of like that. Or you could just focus completely on trying different ways to show the texture or trying to figure out what is the best way to show the hatching, and just kind of separating out this problem instead of making it into just one, putting all the pressure on one single drawing. And so when you're practicing stuff like this, the reason why I think this strategy is so powerful is because you can make pages that still look pretty fun, even though you're practicing something over and over again, and you might not feel like any of the individual drawings by themselves look very good. Now, we are going to kind of switch into just more gestural and focus on, and that's another good vocab term. And a lot of times people apply this type of art technique to life drawing, like figure drawing, usually. But what we're going to do is we're going to do some bones. And let's try to just think about how we were feeling during our warm-up stage. I'm not going to focus on the shadows that much. How we were feeling during our warm-up stage, and that sort of looseness when we did our wrist and finger and elbow warm-up exercises. And let's just do some gesture sketches, and we're going to do a timer. I think we'll just do like 3-minute drawings of all of these objects. So I'm going to set up the timer so that you can see it as well. And I will probably not have my drawing there so that you don't see my drawing, and can just focus on the thing that we're going to draw. And I think you'll be able to see the timer. Can you see the timer? Yes. Okay, so are you ready? Let me get it a little bit closer. All right, so now we're doing sort of quicker sketches. Just move quickly and just try to capture the overall shape of what you're looking at. And you can use or not use any of the techniques that we've been talking about so far. Just try to capture the overall shapes and the lights and the darks. All right, starting now, go. If you always do a small drawing, try a bigger one. If you always do a big drawing and run out of time, do a smaller one. Can you see any planes? What is that? I've been trying to use Google Calendar lately instead of having everything written down. It was getting to the point where I had two written calendars, two different written calendars, one in my bullet journal and one in this little moleskin planner that I carry with me all the time. And then also having one on Google Calendar. Suddenly I had three different calendars that I was trying to use, and it was getting kind of crazy. So I'm trying to use digital calendars more, even though I like having everything written by hand. And now suddenly I get notifications like yesterday I wrote in my calendar, do art for, a couple hours in the evening or whatever. And then I looked at my email today, and in my email there was like 6 emails telling me to do art, like it was a warning notification to do art for 3 hours. And I was like, I don't need that. I thought I turned the notification settings so I won't get emails off, but I got 6 emails telling me about this, that I was supposed to be drawing um, or making art, which I did, by the way. I've been doing a lot of like flower pressing and art journaling type, scrapbooking type, junk journal / nature journals. Okay, you've got 52 seconds. So if there's places that could be darker, look at your values. What are a couple things, couple values you could get a little bit more close to reality? Could you make something darker? And those sort of like last minute things. Could you do a little bit of stippling or hatching somewhere where it's not actually totally white? You might have a lot of places on this drawing that are totally white that are not totally white in real life. So try to get those a little bit more accurate in these last 15 seconds. Doing drawing with a time limit is also a really great technique in general. And it makes you think and prioritize about like how to use your time. Um, All right, great. So 3 minutes on that one. Bye, Anetta. Bye, everyone. Bye, family. Thanks for joining in. And okay, so now we're gonna do another 3 minute gestural sketch. And this time we're gonna up the level of complexity and get like a rounder shape. Let me see if this light looks good. Um, oh, they're gonna go nature journaling the sunset. That is awesome. That would be so fun to do as a family, I think. Okay, depends on your family, maybe. That's so cool. No one else in my family nature journals, like not even close. Maybe I'll convert them someday. Okay, so I'm going to set the timer again for 3 minutes. Look for lights and darks. And in this case, we talked about like here you can see my hatching on this cylinder. Look for these and see how these lines curve around the shape of the cylinder, give it the illusion of a cylinder. Look for those on this ginger, but notice that it has growth rings that wrap around it naturally. So this is one of those things where when you see them, you want to exaggerate them. Is if you're drawing a tree or if you're drawing my finger, for example, look for the lines of like my wrinkles or whatever aspects of my skin. A ring would be another good one that wrap around that shape and make it look three-dimensional because those are going to make your object look more three-dimensional. So as you draw it, think about that. And I'm going to set the timer for this time. I'm going to make it a little bit shorter just to get us, practicing breaking a sweat here. And I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes to draw this ginger. Oh no, I'm realizing that my perspective on it is way worse than your perspective on it. And I'm running out of paper. So I used two pages doing this today. Maybe try varying the size, controlling the size of your drawing. That's one thing that I'm thinking of doing an entire practice on that. Because a lot of times we draw things always at a certain size and we don't realize it until we um, think about it. And then we go back through our journal, our sketchbook, and we see, like, oh, pretty much everything was drawn at that same size. Oh, shoot. I just realized that I have like more things on my. Maybe that's why my Google Calendar was beeping. I probably have something else that I'm supposed to be going to. Um, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be cooking food and something else, hanging out with friends. Now my calendar is like my boss. So we might have to cut this off pretty soon after the ginger. Oh, and the one thing I told Amber I was going to show how to draw things from the inside out. This might not be the best thing to do that for, but I can give it a try. Okay, you've got 26 more seconds. So if you haven't darkened any areas, try to push your values and get, if not a 7 or a 10 or whatever your darkest dark was on the value strip, try to get like a little bit closer to that just so that you have a value range. Or if you don't have anything in the middle, try to use hatching or stippling to get some of those middle values. Being able to have like a wide value range is really important. So I don't really like the way that mine came out, but it's practice. So that's mine right there. And that's my bone. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show how I would sort of draw this from the inside out because Amber is one of my Patreon patrons and asked for me to do it. So it works sort of in theory, sometimes more than it does in practice. But the idea is that, and what I'm gonna do is, I'm not going to draw the outline around this because there is no line around the ginger in real life, and that's what Leonardo said in that quote. So what I'm gonna try to do is I'm gonna try to use this. This is not a full-on black. This isn't a very dark subject, so it doesn't make sense for me to draw it completely black. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to draw the shape starting from the inside, and this is gray, so I'm just going to build it up from the inside instead of making a line around it from the outside, which is what we normally do when we draw everything in nature. And it's so crazy to think about that we're drawing this black line around everything that we see, and we're not even questioning that, or like wondering about that. And that definitely affects the way that you see or don't see things. So sometimes it's good to try to draw some of the inner shapes that you see before you draw the outer shapes. And this is not always easy. Like I started to do an outline right there. Um, it's not always easy and it's not always possible. And the result might not look the way you want. Look, I just drew an outline again there. But you will learn from the process. Maybe on this nub, I can build it from the inside out like that. You'll learn from this process, and hopefully you'll learn how you can take aspects of this concept and apply it to certain drawings or certain subjects really require you to look on the inside. That part is too wet, so it's not staying there. Some subjects really require you to work from the inside, and they make more sense if you draw them that way. There's probably a shadow over here, but that kind of gives you the idea of what that means to draw something from the inside out. There's probably more figure drawing examples of that too. Or like, if there was an extreme shadow on my hand right here and I wanted to draw my hand, maybe what I would do is focus on drawing this sort of hook-like shadow shape from the middle. And then this shadow shape on my thumb over here, and I might only draw that, or I might very lightly, put in the outline like that. See how that didn't start off with, instead of me just drawing like da da da, that's a hand, I drew it starting with the shadow on the inside. I will have to cover that subject more for Amber because I don't know if I did that great of a job describing it, but that's our practice from today. And all of these are priorities. So these are all art priorities that can definitely make your drawing better. And whether you're nature journaling or just practicing drawing for other tasks. See, I could go back in and draw the outline now, and I think I would actually have a pretty interesting ginger drawing starting from the inside. I will post later in the description links to some of these drawing tools that I use. But if you watch any of my other videos in the playlist where I talk about nature journaling supplies, what you need and what you don't, you can find reviews and links to pretty much all of the drawing tools that I ever talk about. All right, everybody, thanks for joining in on the live. Ivea, Jean, Anetta, Jose, a lot of different other people. Cindy was here. Thanks for joining in. It was a fun show, and thanks for patrons who support the show and make it possible. We had a really fun party not that long ago, like an hour ago, and you can find out more at patreon.com/MarleyPfeiffer. Thank you everybody for joining in, and see you again soon on Wednesday night. Bye.